Let me be direct with you from the outset, because what happened in Muscat 3 days ago demands directness. Everyone is focused on the ceasefire negotiations. Everyone is asking whether Iran will restart its nuclear program, whether the United States will reimpose sanctions, whether Israel will conduct another strike. But what I am about to show you is not about missiles. It is not about centrifuges. It is not about the Strait of Hormuz. What I am about to show you is a diplomatic earthquake that happened so quietly, most Western media outlets did not even report it. On May 11th, 2026, the Sultanate of Oman officially closed its airspace to United States military aircraft, not commercial flights. So not civilian aviation, military aircraft. This includes refueling tankers, surveillance planes, and transport aircraft that have been using Omani airspace for American operations across the Middle East for more than 2 decades. The announcement came through a brief statement from Oman's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, confirmed by Reuters and The National, and it has received almost no attention in American media. And that silence tells you everything you need to know about how significant this development actually is. In the next 18 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly why this decision represents Iran's most significant diplomatic victory in the region since 2015, why it undermines American military logistics in ways most analysts have not yet grasped, and why your government is pretending this is not happening. This is a story about geography, about leverage, and about what happens when a regional power understands the game better than a superpower. Subscribe now if you have not already, because what we are about to cover is being actively analyzed by American military planners right now. And you are not getting this analysis from CNN, MSNBC, or Fox News. Let's start with geography, because geography is destiny in the Middle East. Oman occupies one of the most strategically valuable positions on Earth. It sits on the southeastern edge of the Arabian Peninsula, controlling both the Strait of Hormuz to the north and the Arabian Sea to the south. More importantly, for our purposes today, Oman shares an 1,800-kilometer border with Saudi Arabia and a 600-kilometer border with Yemen. To its north, just across a narrow waterway, sits Iran. Now, for context, American military operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria have relied heavily on what defense analysts call the Southern Corridor. This is the network of flight paths that allow American aircraft to move from bases in the Gulf states, primarily Qatar and the UAE, through Omani airspace and into operational theaters in South Asia and the Levant. According to a 2024 Department of Defense logistics report, approximately 40% of American refueling operations in the region transited through Omani airspace. That is not a small number. That is not a redundancy. That is a critical infrastructure dependency. Oman's location means that closing its airspace forces American aircraft into one of 2 alternatives. Option 1, fly north through Saudi airspace, which adds approximately 340 nautical miles to any flight heading east toward Afghanistan or Pakistan. Option 2, fly south around the Arabian Peninsula entirely, adding more than 800 nautical miles. For a KC-135 Stratotanker carrying fuel, that additional distance is not just inconvenient. It is operationally prohibitive. You burn fuel to carry fuel. The math stops working. Subscribe if you are watching this and realizing you are not getting this level of analysis anywhere else. Now, let's talk about why Oman made this decision, because the answer is not what the headlines are suggesting. Announcement number 1, the diplomatic architecture behind this decision. And this one matters more than anything else because it reveals a pattern most Western analysts have completely missed. Oman did not make this decision in isolation. Between April 15th and May 10th, Iranian Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdollahian made 3 separate visits to Muscat, not one. It's ID 3. During the second visit, on April 28th, he met privately with Sultan Haitham bin Tariq for more than 4 hours. According to diplomatic sources cited by Al Jazeera and Middle East Eye, the meeting included detailed discussions about regional security architecture and what Iran described as the normalization of Gulf relations. 2 days after that meeting, on April 30th, Oman's foreign minister Badr al-Busaidi flew to Tehran. He met with President Masoud Pezeshkian and Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. The meeting with Khamenei is significant because Khamenei does not meet with foreign ministers unless the matter is strategic and the outcome is already decided. This was not a negotiation. This was a finalization. Then, on May 6th, just 5 days before the airspace closure, China's special envoy for Middle Eastern affairs, Jai Jun, arrived in Muscat. He carried a message directly from President Xi Jinping. According to Bloomberg, citing 2 Gulf officials familiar with the meetings, China offered Oman a $12 billion infrastructure investment package focused on port development and renewable energy. That number matters. Oman's entire GDP is approximately $115 billion. China just offered an investment equivalent to more than 10% of Oman's economy. Let me be very clear about what this sequence represents. Iran provided the diplomatic framework. China provided the economic incentive. And Oman, which has carefully maintained neutrality in Gulf politics for decades, decided that alignment with Tehran and Beijing offered more value than continued deference to Washington. That is not speculation. That is what the timeline shows. Received. That is announcement number 1. Announcement number 2, the American response. This is the part that reveals just how unprepared Washington was for this development. The Pentagon issued its first public statement on May 12th, more than 24 hours after the Omani announcement. The statement, delivered by Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh, characterized the decision as an unfortunate development that would not impact American operational readiness. She stated, and I am quoting directly here, that the United States maintains robust logistical capabilities across the region and that alternative flight paths had already been established. That statement is technically true and functionally meaningless. Yes, alternative flight paths exist, but those paths are longer, more expensive, and in some cases require overflight permissions from countries that are themselves reconsidering their relationships with Washington. Saudi Arabia, for instance, has not publicly confirmed whether it will grant expanded overflight rights to compensate for the Omani closure. The Saudis have been conspicuously silent on this matter, which in diplomatic terms is never a good sign. Secretary of State Marco Rubio called Sultan Haitham on May 13th. That call lasted 11 minutes, according to a State Department readout. 11 minutes. For a decision that fundamentally alters American military logistics in the Middle East, the Secretary of State spent 11 minutes on the phone. The readout described the conversation as productive and emphasized the enduring partnership between the United States and Oman. It did not mention any reversal of the airspace policy. It did not announce any agreement. It described the call as productive, which in diplomatic language means we asked them to change their mind and they said no. Now, here is where it gets even more revealing. On May 14th, 2 days ago, CNN reported that the administration had quietly approached the UAE about expanding American access to Al Dhafra Air Base to compensate for reduced operational flexibility. The UAE has not responded publicly. But according to sources cited by Defense News, Emirati officials privately told their American counterparts that any expansion of the American military footprint in the UAE would require a comprehensive review of the bilateral defense relationship. That is diplomatic code for we want something in return and we are not sure you can offer it anymore. Think carefully about what this represents. When the United States loses a critical logistical asset and its closest regional allies respond not with immediate support, but with requests for renegotiation, that is not alliance management. That is leverage reversal. Received. That is announcement number 2. Announcement number 3, and this one, almost nobody in the mainstream media is connecting correctly. The economic pressure that made this decision possible. Oman has been facing significant economic challenges since the 2020 oil price collapse. The country's budget deficit reached 3% of GDP in 2020, and despite reforms, Oman has struggled to diversify its economy away from hydrocarbon dependence. According to the International Monetary Fund, Oman's public debt stood at 81% of GDP as of December 2025. That is not a comfortable position for a small Gulf state. China has been systematically positioning itself as the primary investor in Oman's economic future. In 2024, China became Oman's largest trading partner, surpassing the United Arab Emirates and India. Bilateral trade between China and Oman reached $41 billion in 2025, a 23% increase from the previous year. Most of that trade consists of Omani liquefied natural gas exports to China and Chinese machinery and electronics imports to Oman. But here's the critical detail. In February 2026, China and Oman signed a memorandum of understanding to conduct bilateral trade in yuan and Omani riyals, bypassing the dollar entirely. That agreement, which received almost no coverage in Western media, fundamentally changed the economic equation for Muscat. If your largest trading partner is willing to trade in your currency and invest billions in your infrastructure, and that trading partner happens to be the world's second largest economy, your incentive to maintain alignment with Washington diminishes significantly. Iran understood this. Tehran has been coordinating closely with Beijing on Gulf diplomacy since the China-brokered Saudi-Iran normalization agreement in March 2023. That agreement, which shocked Western analysts, established a template. China provides economic incentives. Iran provides regional diplomatic coordination. And together, they offer smaller Gulf states an alternative to American security guarantees. Oman is not alone in reconsidering its relationship with Washington. Kuwait has reduced joint military exercises with the United States by 35% since 2024. Bahrain, home to the U.S. Fifth Fleet, has signed a comprehensive strategic partnership with China that includes Chinese investment in Bahrain's port infrastructure. Even the UAE, long considered America's most reliable Gulf partner, has refused to take sides in the escalating U.S.-China competition, describing its position as strategic autonomy. The pattern is unmistakable. American influence in the Gulf is not collapsing. It is being systematically replaced by a China-Iran diplomatic and economic framework that offers tangible benefits without the political conditionality that typically accompanies American partnerships. Received. That is announcement number 3. Now, let's talk about what is really happening behind the headlines, because there are 2 stories playing out simultaneously, and the mainstream media is only covering one of them. The story you are hearing is that Oman made an independent decision to close its airspace for neutral foreign policy reasons, and that this decision has minimal impact on American operations. That story is false, not misleading. False. The story you are not hearing is that Iran has successfully constructed a diplomatic coalition in the Gulf that is actively constraining American military options, and that this coalition is backed by Chinese economic power that dwarfs anything Washington is willing or able to offer in response. That story is true, and it has profound implications not just for the Middle East, but for American global military posture. Let me give you some context. The United States maintains approximately 40,000 military personnel across the Gulf states. That includes major bases in Qatar, the UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. Those bases exist because Gulf states have historically viewed American military presence as a security guarantee against regional threats, primarily Iran. But that calculation is changing. Gulf states are asking themselves a very simple question. If China is willing to invest hundreds of billions of dollars in our economies, buy our oil and gas, and not lecture us about human rights or democracy, and if Iran is willing to negotiate regional security arrangements that do not require regime change or political transformation, why do we need American protection? And more importantly, protection from what? That question is existential for American strategy in the region. Because if the answer is we do not actually need American protection anymore, then the entire architecture of American military presence in the Middle East becomes vulnerable. Not tomorrow, not next year, but over the next decade, the foundation is eroding. Trump administration officials have responded to these developments with a combination of denial and threat. National Security Advisor Michael Waltz stated in a press briefing on May 15th that any country that restricted American military access would face consequences in terms of defense cooperation and security assistance. That statement landed with a thud. Oman does not receive significant American security assistance. Oman does not need American defense cooperation. Oman has China offering $12 billion in infrastructure investment and Iran offering regional diplomatic normalization. What exactly is Washington threatening to take away? This is the central problem with American diplomacy in 2026. Washington continues to operate as if it holds all the leverage, as if access to American markets and American military protection is so valuable that countries will accept any political cost to maintain it. But the world has changed. China offers an alternative economic model. Iran offers an alternative regional security framework. And for small states like Oman, that combination is increasingly attractive. If you operate a business that depends on Middle Eastern energy exports, what is happening in Muscat is not just a foreign policy story. It is a supply chain story. If you are watching fuel prices, this is a logistics cost story. And if you are an American taxpayer funding a military presence that is losing access to critical infrastructure, this is a budget story. The ripple effects are already showing up. You just are not being told to connect them. Stay with me because this is where the historical parallel becomes impossible to ignore. And it will explain exactly where this is heading. This pattern has repeated throughout history, and every time it repeats, the outcome is the same. Let me take you back to the Peloponnesian War, 431 to 404 BCE. Athens and Sparta, the two great powers of ancient Greece, went to war. The war lasted 27 years. Both sides exhausted themselves militarily, economically, and politically. And who won? Neither of them. Persia, the external power that had been carefully staying on the sidelines, funding both sides at different moments, offering diplomatic support without committing troops, emerged as the dominant influence in Greek affairs. The parallel is exact. The United States and Iran have been locked in confrontation for more than 45 years. Both sides have spent enormous resources. Both have engaged in proxy conflicts. Both have attempted to isolate the other diplomatically. And who is winning? China. In that frame, China is not fighting. China is investing. China is building infrastructure. China is offering economic partnerships. And China is systematically constructing an alternative regional order where American military presence becomes less relevant every year. Iran understands this. Tehran knows it cannot defeat the United States militarily, but Tehran does not need to. Tehran just needs to wait, maintain regional partnerships, and allow China to do the heavy lifting economically. And that is exactly what is happening. The Oman airspace closure is not an isolated event. It is one move in a much larger game that has been playing out for years. American strategists understand this too, which is why the response has been so muted. There is no good option. Washington cannot outbid China economically. The United States is not going to offer Oman $12 billion in infrastructure investment. Congress will not approve it, and even if they did, it would take years to deliver. Washington cannot threaten Oman militarily. Bombing Muscat because they closed their airspace is not a realistic option, and everyone knows it. And Washington cannot offer a more attractive regional security framework because the framework they have been offering for 30 years is increasingly seen as obsolete. So where does this leave us? Let me give you three clear paths because there is no honest middle ground here. Path 1, accommodation. The United States accepts that its military presence in the Gulf is going to shrink, that countries like Oman will continue to diversify their partnerships, and that China and Iran will play larger roles in regional security. In this scenario, Washington negotiates new arrangements that accept reduced access in exchange for maintaining some level of influence. This path requires humility, flexibility, and a willingness to share power. Based on the rhetoric coming out of Washington over the past 3 years, this path seems unlikely. Path 2, escalation. The United States decides that the erosion of its Gulf position is unacceptable and responds with economic pressure, diplomatic isolation, and potentially military demonstrations designed to remind Gulf states why American protection matters. This path risks pushing more countries toward China and Iran, not fewer. It also risks military confrontation that could spiral into a broader regional conflict. Some voices in Washington are already calling for this approach. Senator Tom Cotton stated on May 14th that Oman's decision was unacceptable and that the United States should consider all options to reverse it. That language is dangerous. Path 3, managed decline. The United States does nothing decisive. It issues statements, it makes phone calls, it adjusts flight paths. And over the next 5 to 10 years, American military infrastructure in the Gulf slowly becomes less relevant as countries continue to hedge toward China and Iran. This is probably the most likely path because it requires the least immediate political cost. But it is also the path that leads to the largest long-term strategic loss. I think we are on path 3 right now, and the reason is simple. The American political system is not designed to make the kind of strategic adjustments that path 1 requires, and it is not reckless enough to pursue path 2 until the situation becomes far more dire. So we are getting path 3 by default, slow erosion. Declining influence, right? Either try, and eventually a regional order where American preferences matter less and less. Here are the questions I want you to take away. First, how many more Gulf states will follow Oman's example in the next 24 months? Second, at what point does the cumulative loss of access force a fundamental rethinking of American military posture in the region? And third, what happens to global oil markets if American military presence in the Gulf continues to decline and China becomes the primary security guarantor? Tell me in the comments what you think the administration does next. Tell me if you think path 1, path 2, or path 3 is most likely. Tell me what angle you think is being most underreported in this entire situation. We will keep tracking every development in Muscat, Tehran, Beijing, and Washington. That is what this channel does every single day. Subscribe now. Share this analysis with everyone in your network who is trying to understand what is actually happening in the Gulf. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next update, and we will see you in the next analysis.